Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a recommendation video. If you like this book, then try this book, Fantasy Romance Edition. Alright guys, so I just checked and it has been over 2 years since I've done a if you like this, try this rec video. So in this video, I picked out 10 popular fantasy romance books and paired them with books that have a similar overall vibe, whether that be similar characters, similar tropes, similar world building. Just for some reason, these books remind me of these books, and I am so excited to talk about them. Now, if you're looking for a specific book, definitely utilize those timestamps down below. And if you are unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's get into these recommendations. So starting off with one of my favorite fantasy romance / paranormal romance series, we have From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. Now, I have pitched this book so many times, but if you're unfamiliar with the story, we are following Poppy, and Poppy at birth was chosen to become the maiden. So she has been living in isolation since then, just waiting for this mysterious ritual known as the Ascension. Now, Poppy really longs for freedom and friendship, so one day she goes out in disguise to this bar where she meets Hawk, and Hawk is the newest member of the Rise Guard, and because of some very convenient circumstances, ends up becoming Poppy's personal guard and slowly draws Poppy into his world. This series is filled with romance, action, paranormal creatures, and it's just so unbelievably good. I will admit I am not completely caught up. However, I love this series and also the prequel series. Highly, highly recommend. Now, if you enjoy this series, I think you will love Lady of Darkness by Melissa K. Rohirch. Now, I've seen a lot of people compare this to ACOTAR. For me, this book felt so similar to From Blood and Ash. If you're unfamiliar with the story, we are following Scarlet, and her along with her two sisters were adopted by the Assassin Lord and raised to become crazy good assassins. So these girls are feared by pretty much everyone in this community. But because of a traumatic and upsetting event, our main character is kind of in like timeout at this noble's house and is going to be staying there until she completes a mission and proves to the Assassin Lord that she is trustworthy. And if she does complete this mission in a somewhat timely manner, the Assassin Lord will help her get revenge on a Fae Fire Prince that our main character, Scarlet, believes killed her mother. And the story goes from there. There's also missing children and a whole mystery, and there's a lot going on in this book. I've also only read the first book. I have not continued with the series, so I am just saying this first book reminded me of the first book in From Blood and Ash. I don't know how, as the series progresses, if there's differences or if they become more similar. But overall, I really enjoyed this, and I just think the main character really reminded me a lot of Poppy. Actually, she reminded me a lot of Poppy in Poppy's later books. Just such a badass assassin, really strong, and also kind of having to uncover these secrets, and I just felt they had a lot of similar vibes. Also, the romance felt super similar to the first book in From Blood and Ash, and overall, I just absolutely love both books, so highly recommend. If you are looking for something that has a similar overall vibe to From Blood and Ash, definitely check out Lady of Darkness. And next up, we have The Never King by Nikki St. Crowe. This is a super spicy, dark Peter Pan reimagining, and we are following the descendants of Wendy Darling. So for the last 2 centuries, the descendants of Wendy have been taken, presumably by Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, and when they return home, they are completely broken. So our main character is one of these descendants, and her mother has come off kind of mentally insane and is been terrified that Peter Pan is going to come and abduct her daughter. So her daughter does not believe any of this. That is until on her 18th birthday, Peter Pan shows up with the Lost Boys and takes her to Neverland. So essentially most of this first book is just Wendy trying to figure out exactly what Neverland is, what the Lost Boy and Peter Pan's objectives are and motivations, and it was overall just a really fun, super, super spicy, check trigger wordings, time that I really enjoyed. But if you love the Never King series, I think you should check out The Last Lost Girl by Casey L. Bond. This is one of my top reads so far of the year. I absolutely adore this book. Now, I will say, story-wise, besides the fact that they are both dark Peter Pan reimaginings, stories are pretty different. So in this one, we are following this girl who, when she was an orphan, she was found by her big sister named Belle. And Belle seems a little bit obsessed with the original story of Peter Pan, to the point that anytime she sees a copy of this tale, she steals it. Also, Belle might possess some creepy magical abilities, but our main character doesn't really question anything until Belle says that she has to return to Neverland and she can't take our main character with her. Now, our main character is not about that, decides to grab Belle, and Belle accidentally transports her to Neverland, and we find out who Belle really is. I think you guys can probably guess. And then our main character is kidnapped by Hook, and in this book, Hook is actually kind of like the good guy, and the story goes from there. I will say this book does play around kind of with the amnesia trope, where all of the characters in Neverland, they will slowly start to forget their past. So most of this book is them trying to remind each other of who they are, where they come from. And overall, I just thought it was such a good story. I was hooked. The pacing is perfect. It also has really, really dark vibes that I like, mixed with the light story of Peter Pan. Not that it's super light, but just I love dark Peter Pan reimaginings. But overall, if you like The Never King, please check out The Last Lost Girl. And this next pairing was the motivation behind this video, because these books feel like they were set in the same exact world, despite having two completely different authors. So first up, we have Fortuna Sworn by KJ Sutton. This story is following Fortuna, who is a nightmare, which means if she touches you, you see your biggest, darkest fear, and it's absolutely terrifying. So for the last 2 years, Fortuna has been searching for her brother who has gone missing, and one day the Fae from an unseelie court shows up and says, hey, I have a deal for you. You can marry me and I will show you where your brother is, or you can pretend I never showed up and you will probably never see your brother again. And Fortuna ends up taking this Fae up on this deal, and this story goes from there. I absolutely adore the first few books I read in this series. Unfortunately, when I read the series the first time, all the audiobooks haven't released. I also have been corrected. This series is not finished. They are still waiting for the last book. So I definitely want to jump back into this series soon. But oh my gosh, this series is so similar to this series. How does it feel? Similar vibes, similar world. If you're unfamiliar with How Does It Feel, we are following this girl that when she was a child, she believed she saw a fae, and because of this, she's been obsessed with creatures with wings. So when she became older, she grew up to become a biologist, where she was studying a certain type of moth that is going endangered. So while she was searching for this moth, she ends up falling down this portal into the Unseelie Court, where she is almost killed repeatedly by the king of the Unseelie Court and forced to do these trials in order to prove her worth. Now, Fortuna also has to go through trials in order to essentially survive in the Unseelie Kingdom, so that is similar, but really just the world in this book. It has that uncomfortable, creepy, eerie Fae vibe, which is so different from books like ACOTAR and These Hollow Vows, and books that really glorify and make the Fae just seem beautiful. And this is a completely different vibe, which I really, really like. So I'm very excited to continue with the series. I will say I liked book 1 more than book 2. Book 3 has yet to be released. But overall, if you like Fortuna Sworn, I definitely think you will enjoy How Does It Feel? And next up we have The Zodiac Academy by Carolyn Peckman and Susanne Valenti. This is a fantasy romance series following the Vega twins, Tori and Darcy. Now, Tori and Darcy, at the start of this, I believe are 17 or 18 years old, and they're living a very impoverished life. They really only have each other to depend on. And one day, a vampire shows up at their doorstep and says, hey, you guys are actually Fae royalty, paranormal creatures exist, and if you come with me to the Zodiac Academy, you can claim your Fae inheritance. So the girls decide that seems like a good idea. They go to the Zodiac Academy, only to find out there are already these celestial heirs that are ruling the school. Now, these heirs are made up of a vampire, dragon shifter, siren, and a werewolf. So all of the paranormal creatures you can think of. And the first few books are very much a bully romance, and as it progresses, the series just becomes filled with action, romance, mystery. It has a little bit of everything. I will say, the writing leaves a little bit to be desired, and I think the series has gone on a little bit too long, but I was addicted to the first few books in this series. I was obsessed with the romances. They were just so, so good. So highly, highly recommend. Now, if you enjoy the Zodiac Academy, I think you will love Obsession. Now, I will say I've only read the first book in this series. It is a paranormal why choose fantasy romance series. Now, I did really enjoy this first book. I just didn't pick up the rest because this series kind of reminds me of the fall, and I want to read it during like spooky season. But this series is following our main character, who is the heir of this werewolf pack. Unfortunately, she cannot shift, so she is sent off to this elite paranormal university where all of these creatures have to learn how to be like really good werewolves, vampires, etc., similar to the Zodiac Academy. And our main character kind of ends up in a relationship with a few different creatures like that, and it goes from there. So overall, I will say I like the Zodiac Academy a little bit more than this first book. However, I've only read this first book, so it might get so much better as you progress through the series. I'm very excited to continue the series in the fall, but let me know if you read them. Do you think they are similar? But overall, I think if you like the Zodiac Academy, you will enjoy Obsession. And next up are two YA fantasies that actually released somewhat recently, and these books remind me so much of each other. First up, we have Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This is my favorite YA fantasy that I've read this year. I am kicking myself that it took me so long to pick this book up because I loved it, worth all the hype. Now, this book is similar to The Hunger Games. We're following our main character, and she lives in this community where there are elites or people with powers. Then there are ordinaries who are powerless people who are almost shunned from society or even killed. Now, our main character is an ordinary, but she's been pretending to have psychic powers. And this really gets her into hot water when she accidentally saves the prince of this kingdom, which forces her to compete in the purging trials, where all of these elites have to show off their powers in order to survive. And it goes from there. But wow, I loved this. The banter was perfect. The romance was so good, and I feel like this doesn't typically happen with YA, but angsty, just perfection. Then we have The Crimson Moth, and this is by Kristen Ciccarelli. I think I might have butchered that. But anyway, I read this back when it first released. It was my Patreon book club pick. And this is a YA fantasy about a witch and a witch hunter. So our main character is a witch, and she's actually like a vigilante witch, and she is being hunted by this witch hunter who happens to be her best friend's older brother. Now, our main character decides that she needs information from this witch hunter, so she pretends to date him, while the witch hunter is thinking the same thing about our main character. He suspects she might be a witch, but also wants to get information out of her. So in their romance that slowly starts to blossom, they have confusing feelings, and it goes from there. But overall, these books just felt so similar, mostly because you have a main character who is hiding her true identity from the love interest whose motivation is to kill the main character. And I thought these books were super, super similar. I will say I preferred Powerless a little bit more, but this was still a solid read. I think I gave it 3.75. So highly recommend. If you enjoyed Powerless, and you're looking for a book with a similar type feel, check out Heartless Hunter. And next up are two of my favorite books that feature both vampires and witches. First up, we have Black Sunshine by Karina Halle. This is a dark vampire witch paranormal romance. We are following Lenore, and she believes on her 21st birthday, after she gets out of school, she's going to go clubbing with her friends and then go on a camping trip with her two loving parents. Well, all of that changes when a week before her 21st birthday, she is kidnapped by a vampire named Absalon, who tells her that, hey, your parents are taking you to that cabin because they are actually witches. And not only are they witches, they are vampire hunter witches, and they plan on stabbing you through the heart when you turn 21 and you're half vampire. And the story goes from there. It is their romance. The second book, The Blood is Love, is just as good. It's one of my favorite vampire duologies. Highly recommend. Now, I recently read Shadow Kissed, and this series, or this book, reminded me so much of Black Sunshine. So this is actually a new adult series, so it is not quite as spicy. It is still rather dark, so definitely check trigger warnings. But this is following our main character, who is a descendant of a witch, and she is being protected from vampires because vampires have been known to kidnap and kill witches. So our main character, in the very beginning of this, ends up being kidnapped by a vampire, taken to the City of Nightmares, and finds out that there might be some very interesting things happening with her parentage. And then she also needs to uncover mysteries, try to figure out what happened to her mother, and also has a romance slowly starting to bloom with the vampire that kidnapped her. And it goes from there. But these books both feel very, very similar. Like I said, similar world, similar romance, a lot of similar tropes, and just both really, really fun. And this next pairing is a little bit of a stretch, but I will explain why I paired these two books together after I talk a little about each book. So first up, we have A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. This is an adult Norse-inspired fantasy romance story. We are following Freya, and at the beginning of our story, we find out that she is in a loveless marriage to this man who is God-touched, which means he has a certain special ability, and this ability actually helps the community, which is why Freya is forced to marry him, just because they are dependent on this guy for food, essentially. So it becomes very, very evident that our main character, Freya, and her husband do not like each other when he gets her in this predicament where she has to fight a Viking warrior to the death. Now, it turns out Freya has actually been harboring a secret, and she is also God-touched and is able to defend herself, which gets her into even more trouble when she is forced to then marry a different Viking, I don't want to say captain, but a different Viking leader who wants to use Freya's power in order to pillage and ravage the land and take down other Viking groups. So most of this book is really just Freya trying to find her own freedom, her own autonomy, while all of these different men want to use her in different ways. So I really, really enjoyed this book. I love Danielle L. Jensen's writing. Every book I've read by her, I've really, really loved. Now, if you liked that book, you might enjoy Stolen by the Wolves, and this is a why choose paranormal, Omegaverse, Viking-inspired series. Now, these books are similar in the fact that they are both Viking-inspired. We are dealing with different Viking tribes going after each other. I just feel like both books have a very, very similar feel. Now, main story, pretty different. We are following our main character in this book. I believe her name is Tamsin, and she lives in this very pious community that are trying to stay safe from the different Vikings that are going around Britannia and just, like I said, sacking and pillaging. Now, our main character Tamsin's village accidentally lets in a group of Vikings, believing they are something that they aren't, and she ends up being captured and taken to a Viking where she is forced to possibly have to marry him in order to save her people. So there are similar things going on, the main difference being that this is Omegaverse and A Fate Inked in Blood is fantasy romance. So this does have all of like those Omegaverse terms and things like that, and there's not quite, I feel like this one honestly feels less fantastical and whimsical than the A Fate Inked in Blood, but I enjoy both books immensely. So if you enjoy the show The Last Kingdom or Vikings, I think both of these books would be right up your alley. All right, so these next two books are gonna have slightly different format because honestly, they are not similar in plot, characters, world building, really anything, but they do have a similar writing style, and that is because they were written by the same author. They both have a very lyrical, whimsical, not super easily digestible writing style that also leaves you trying to puzzle things out. Personally, I absolutely love it, but it's not going to be for everyone. So first up, we have When the Moon Hatched. This is one of my top reads of the year. Absolutely adored it. Dragons, fantasy romance, beautiful world building, just such an amazing read. If you enjoyed this book, I really don't have any other books to recommend you because yes, I do know other fantasy romance books that have dragons, but they just don't have the feel of this book because it is so unique. So if you enjoyed this book and you're looking for something similar, I would recommend To Bleed a Crystal Bloom by Sarah A. Parker, the same author. This is another fantasy romance. It is a very loosely inspired Rapunzel reimagining. At the start of this, we're following this man who stumbles upon a girl in the middle of a massacre. Everyone is dead besides her. He takes her back to his home, raises her in isolation, and all he asks in return is a drop of her blood every night. And throughout both of these books, we are really trying to uncover what is happening with our main characters, and the writing is the only thing, honestly, that is similar. But I do enjoy both of these, and I think that if you like When the Moon Hatched and you're looking for a book that has a similar feel, To Bleed a Crystal Bloom is the best I can come up with. And this last pairing features a monster romance and a horror thriller, so it doesn't exactly fit in this video, but I wanted to include it. So we have Whispers of the Deep, and this is a monster romance following a human that is living in this underwater community, and she's really just trying to prove herself when she is captured and kidnapped by an Undine named Argus, or a merman, and he wants to use our main character to get information on how to defeat the humans that he wants to get out of his underwater area. So anyway, a romance slowly blossoms between our main character and Argus, and they have to decide, do they try to save their respective people, or do they run off together? So if you enjoyed the sci-fi elements in this book, I think you will really enjoy Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. It is a sci-fi horror, one of my absolute favorites, and it is following, well, it starts off with this group of people that go out to make a mockumentary about mermaids, or like a fake documentary, and that ship ends up going missing, so a second ship goes out trying to figure out what happened, and they discover that mermaids are real, and they're evil, and want to kill everybody. So really, the second book is just following these people as they try to survive and document this mermaid attack. But I think it does have very similar like sci-fi elements to Whispers of the Deep, so I think that if you enjoyed this, you should definitely check out the book by Mira Grant. Alright guys, that is it for my If You Like This, Try This rec video. Please let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of the books I mentioned. And I'd like to say a special thank you to my Paladin protectors, Amanda, Erin, Leslie, and Kat. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel, and thank you all for watching. I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!